In a quarantine zone outside Canberra, there's been a biosecurity scare. With visitors off limits and camera in hand, Greg Palethorpe's giving us a tour of his locked-down egg farm.
We have our hot and cold zones where we need to go through decontamination processes on their way in and out.
Greg's on edge.
Hello girl, how are you going?
The deadly avian flu was detected at a property 7 kilometres away.
So just come up, the hens are all very quiet at the moment.
And yesterday, he found one of his hens showing symptoms.
Effectively, we euthanise that hen and we basically put it in a bag and a bin in our controlled area, our hot zone. Our own biosecurity team straight away, and they quickly sent out someone to come pick it up where they do swabs. But yeah, it makes you feel really poor.
And so if a chook's positive, what does that mean?
So we'd have to cull all the hens on site, and then they'd either be buried or burnt here, which for me that would be a heartbreaking thing to happen, to see all your hens killed. It's a trying time when you know there's potential for such a disease that will cause such devastation to your hens and your business is potentially floating around.
We're in the grip of a devastating avian flu outbreak with multiple strains across Australia's east coast. And there's an urgent fight to keep it contained. To understand the scale of the situation and what's at stake, it's important to understand the scale of the sector, which is why I'm here to meet industry rep Dr. Jo Sillence.
Well, for a start, there's two sectors, right? There's eggs and there's meat. Australians get through 50 kilograms of chicken meat for every man, woman and child per year. And then in terms of eggs, it's somewhere around 18 million eggs a day, which is a heck of a lot of breakfast eggs.
And all these farms are more or less bunched together?
Yeah, they're bunched together around a processing plant, which is a good thing and a bad thing. It means that they're separated from each other in terms of groups, but it also means that if there's a problem in one group, it tends to affect a whole area.
So how many outbreaks are there at the moment and where are they?
There's an outbreak in Victoria near Meredith, and it's got a single satellite farm at Terang. So it's kind of, they're linked, okay? In New South Wales, it's northwest Sydney, 2 farms, and then there's 1 egg farm in Canberra. In terms of outbreak, what's unprecedented is the response.
Around the affected farms, control zones, kilometres wide, restrict the movement of people, poultry and products, with state government running surveillance, trying to isolate the virus before it spreads.
The highly pathogenic one moves on trucks or by birds moving. It can actually potentially spread on the wind up to 1 kilometre or so. For chickens, it's really contagious. So we want to be testing basically all the birds, all the chickens in that area to make sure they're not carrying the virus.
In virology labs, genetic detectives are equipped with the same tools used to track and trace COVID-19. Swabs come in twice a day. The high-risk samples are marked red.
We've tested hundreds of samples. Usually it's a few hundred each day.
There's no sign of the H5 strain that's causing havoc overseas. Instead, these outbreaks are linked to 3 strains from the H7 family.
I think what's surprising is they're all happened at the same time. That's unusual.
The H7 strains have been traced to Australia's wild bird population, namely ducks, and responsible for nearly every poultry outbreak in our country since the 1970s.
They're being killed at the rate of 7,000 an hour.
There's a mutation that happens while it's in the chickens and it turns into this high-path avian influenza, which causes all the disease. So you can have thousands of chickens die overnight, just suddenly, seemingly without any symptoms.
That's why we're told Australia's biosecurity policy is not to manage the virus, but to eradicate it. While cooked poultry products from infected areas are safe to eat, there have been major delays getting eggs onto shelves.
You've got 2 million birds roughly now that have been culled out of the system, and which is just horrific for those farms, unfortunately, and also for the supply chain, which now means, say, 1.8 million eggs less a day produced in this country.
Smaller egg farms typically supply smaller shops and hospitality. Bigger farms supply supermarkets and fast food chains, and usually the packaging process is shared across farms.
What ended up happening was essentially like a standstill. People stopped taking in eggs from other farms, and then you saw supply chain issues because eggs weren't necessarily leaving farms and then getting packed and then ending up on consumer shelves.
Some supermarkets are indefinitely limiting egg purchases.
Limiting purchases is part of the rule book, and it's very important to avoid things getting out of control.
If the virus spreads no further, it's forecast supply chains should normalise by the year's end.
We'll get to a safer space from a supply perspective that should help to keep prices, the increase of prices at bay, and not further contribute to the cost of living crisis.
But the chances of that are literally up in the air, with free-range farms especially vulnerable.
You can be the best farmer in the world, you can have the best biosecurity, but at the end of the day, I can't stop a single migratory bird flying over my farm and either defecating or mixing in with commercial birds, and you've got a recipe for disaster.
It does remain a dynamic situation. Emergency responses can be very complex.
In Australia's tropical north, biosecurity rangers are on the lookout for signs of any virus in wild birds. It's part of a nationwide surveillance response that's ramped up after the federal government committed another $7 million in funding last week.
And whilst it might be encouraging that there hasn't been any new detections over the last little while, it is still a very dynamic and evolving situation that we will continue to manage effectively.
Australia must go 2 months without a single case before it can be officially declared free of avian flu. An anxious time for farmers like Greg, who's been waiting to find out if there's a positive case in his flock.
Greg, how are you?
G'day Tom, how you going?
Let's get your results back.
Yeah, the chief vet rang me straight away as soon as they got them, and they were negative, so that means no bird flu, which was a great relief for me. They did have another case, a backyard case in Canberra, so to me that sort of says there's more potential that it has spread to wild bird population, and that is obviously, that's our primary risk and my number one concern. Even if it's not and it's an isolated case, it just extends the biosecurity controls that are in place for a longer period of time. You know, that's every day we get on the farm, you're still, what are we going to see?